Alien encounter, fact or fiction. Learn the truth. This is In Contact. With your host, veteran journalist, Bill Robinson.
In 1980 in England, 780 people saw an alien craft land. There were picture shot of it, videotape shot of it, and audio recordings, yet the government says it didn't happen. Our guest tonight blew the lid off on the story. Peter Robbins and Larry Warren. You're going to like this story. I'd like to welcome Larry Warren and Peter Robbins to this setup In Contact, and good to have you gentlemen with us. And of course, you were the gentleman in the Air Force in 1980 that blew the whistle on the story, am I correct?
That's right, Bill.
And then, Peter, you're the researcher that's documenting the story.
To as good a degree as I've been able, yes.
Okay. Why would we need so much documentation? 80 Air Force personnel saw it. It was recorded. What's the situation?
Documentation, how do you mean that?
Okay. What I'm referring to is how could the government keep the lid on
How could they
this
keep
thing?
it quiet?
How could they keep this quiet? We had, 70, 80 people?
They still managed to do it, and in a whole bunch of areas in life. It's not just this particular area of UFOs. I mean, it spills over into a lot of areas. There were 70 to 80 of us. Some people were English. There was some bobbies there from the town of Woodbridge, which is very close. And I think the best way to make it, the silence, to keep the wall of silence up, is a lot of people reacted in their own ways. They were terrified. There were a couple suicides because of this, and I just happened to be the loudest whistleblower. I certainly wasn't the first. I was the one that got through in 82.
Tell us a little about the story.
Well, I was in the Air Force, and I was stationed in England. I had just gotten there about a month before these events in question. I was in security police, and my job was to basically guard nuclear storage areas and things like that. It was an anti-terrorist training and background we had, and at that time the Cold War was very much in effect, so our jobs are very valid. On the night in question, I should set it up for you. 2 nights before the event I was involved in, there was an amazing encounter with 3 or 4 security policemen off the east gate of RAF Woodbridge, which was our sister base from Bentwater, 6 miles away. And these gentlemen encountered some very bizarre things. They had missing time, all sorts of negatives happened to them. Senior people on the base really didn't believe it. The next night something else happened, which is rather vague. We still haven't pulled up everything on that. I had been in Germany for 2 days. I'd met a girl in London, and a friend of ours and mine went over for the Christmas break. We worked 6 days on and 3 off, so I had a few days. And on the 28th of December, we'd be starting our shift again. I got back to the base late on the 27th and was unaware of these UFO events. And the next morning spent the day in the city of Ipswich, then came back to the base, and I must say also we were in a heightened state of readiness because of events in Poland with Solidarity and Lech Walesa and those things, where we were at the brink of war had the Soviets moved on Solidarity. And in America, I bet no one in this audience realizes that we were at war level. I mean, we were war readiness. Most of our planes were A-10 tank busters that were used to kill tanks, low-level bombers, and they were all over in Germany at that point. So our base is very quiet. But we're in a heightened state of readiness. I got onto my post that night. We have a guard mount first, where your weapon's issued and you're checked to see if you're on narcotics or unfit for duty for that night. We're around extremely high explosives and carrying amazingly powerful firearms. So they make sure you're ready to be out there. I got posted to a very insignificant post that's only manned during alerts. I started to hear transmissions concerning lights out in the direction of RAF Woodbridge over this forest called Rendlesham Forest, which was a tract forest used for lumber purposes in Great Britain. I looked skyward. I didn't see anything that was particularly unusual, but I felt strange when I saw some deer run down to the fence line, jump over the fence line, and run across the tarmac right in front of me. I had a very strange feeling. Anxiety, I guess, is the best word for it. The deer continued, jumped the other fence, and I just got nervous. But I didn't have time to think of it long because our security control office, Central Security Control, called up and told me to deactivate my post when a certain Lieutenant Bruce England arrived and Sergeant Adrian Bustinza in a vehicle with other personnel. I was to go with them to the motor pool and get light-alls. No explanation was given. Do you want any?
What happened here?
Well, this is where...
Now get to this.
Well, this is where it got strange. We got over to the motor pool, and I didn't ask any questions what we were doing. We filled up these gas-powered generators called light-alls, hitched them in the back of the pickup trucks, and we were having meter problems with them, and a senior officer there was reading that they were empty while they were overflowing. So he was either distracted by something. He seemed very tense and nervous. We met a convoy of vehicles after that situation was resolved at the main gate of Bentwaters and made the 6-mile trek over to RAF Woodbridge. When we got on the way, there were a lot of transmissions concerning people wanting to get a hold of the base commanding officer, which was a Gordon Williams. And no one could find him, apparently. I still had no idea what was going on. We thought it was an exercise. What made that explanation a little funny is that we still had loaded live ammo. And with a treaty with Great Britain, we couldn't have our weapons off our bases, but we did. I got to the east end of the Woodbridge field. There were flares in the road. There were numerous security police vehicles out there. A civilian car was there. We passed them very slowly, and one of the roadblock guys told the women they wouldn't delay her long because there was unexploded ordnance in the area. Then I got nervous because I was thinking, I don't know anything about defusing bombs, and what the heck are we really up to? We got to the East Gate Road. We turned left into this forest. It proceeded at a very high speed, considering these were, dirt roads. Got to a clearing. There was an armorer's vehicle. To make a long story short, we split into 5-man groups. We were lower-ranking guys. I was an airman first class. Had to maintain radio silence. We moved through the woods. Still no explanation being given on what we're doing.
What did you finally say, Larry? Give us.
Yeah, well, we got to a clearing after a lot of, I could see other activity in the forest and red tape around trees. And transmissions was saying we had to avoid hot spots, so apparently this meant radiation. At that time I thought it was a forest fire. We got to a farmer's field. There was an airman very upset next to a tree. In the field beyond that were motion picture cameras and a video camera, bulky technology in 1980, but nevertheless present. 2 British bobbies with a still camera taking pictures, and numerous Air Force personnel, some on duty, some off. Disaster preparedness people with Geiger counters, and there was a mist on the ground. It was maybe as high as the stage, I guess, is a good example, 50 feet in diameter approximately, with structure to it, and yet you could see through it at times. I still didn't think UFO. Out in the distance was a farmer's farmhouse that had a light on in the second floor window. Someone was watching this too, a civilian, there was no question. My buddy next to me, Sergeant Bustinza, said, "This reminds me of what happened in Alaska." What gave the event reality were 2 cows that were watching this, as we were too. Before long, a red light came in, made a downward arc over this field. I at first thought it was a A-10 coming in. We were on the flight path. It turned out to be this basketball-sized red light that stopped over this mist. There was an explosion. Shards of light fell upon it. Flash burns were caused to my eyes and many other people. It was right in the middle of us. We backed off. Some people ran into the woods. Some were my commanding officers at the time.
How many people were at this point?
It's at least 80 folks out there, from people with much higher rank than me.
Videotape, audio tape?
It was filmed and photographed throughout, and that's basically been verified other than the fact we don't have the film. The events that transpired next were like out of a science fiction movie, and every movement was distorted, very slow, and thought and voice was at half speed, it seemed. There was a structured machine or craft or whatever people want to call these things in the place of this mist. It didn't look like a flying saucer or whatever they're supposed to look like. It was almost a machine. Very low to the ground, no windows, no flag of country of origin, anything like that. We backed off, the cameras are going all the while. And before long, our wing commander arrived. I'll put this in a nutshell for you. Gordon Williams, which the Air Force, and he still denies he was involved, but all of us know he was. And there was a spherical ball of light that moved around this craft or whatever. It moved out, it split into 3 distinct balls of light. That's all I can describe it as. It was a foot above the ground, and within that light you could see definitely facial features. There were small...
See what, aliens and...
Well, for lack of a better word, I guess, these were somewhat transparent. You could see through them. It looked like a projection at some points, but there was someone there.
Break, Larry. When we come back, we're going to listen to that audio tape. Stay with us. Okay, they were like videotapes, all type footage, and audio.
An audio tape.
And we've got an audio tape. Set it up for us.
Well, the tape folks are about to hear was made by our Deputy Base Commander, Charles Halt. At the time of, on the 28th actually, he went out to debunk these events, as he told us recently, and brought a small dictation tape recorder with him, and a small party of people went off in about a mile away from where the events I just described happened. What they found initially were trace marks and then a break in the canopy of the trees. Something had come down in a different area. As they proceed, things start to become very strange. The objects, the farmer's barnyard animals on this nearby farm start to act up, make an awful lot of noises, that he says. You hear personnel, what's important about it is senior Air Force personnel start to react to something that they claim officially does not exist, and that's what the value of this tape is, because this isn't actually the real goods. Very important.
Let's listen to it.
Shape and all, but they seem to be steady now rather than a pulsating or glow with a red flash. We just crossed the creek, and we're kind of reading stuff. Getting 3 good clicks on the meter, and we're seeing strange lights in the sky. 244, we're at the far side of the second farmer's field, and made sighting again about 110 degrees. This looks like it's clear out to the coast. It's right on the horizon. Moves about a bit and flashes from time to time. Still steady or red in color. Also, after negative readings in the satellite field, we're picking up slight readings, 4 or 5 clicks now on the meter. 305, we see strange strobe-like flashes to the rather sporadic, but there's definitely something, some kind of phenomenon. 305, at about 10 degrees horizon directly north, we've got 2 strange objects, half-moon shape, dancing about with colored lights on them. That gets to be about 5 to 10 miles out, maybe less. The half-moons are now turned into full circles. Because I know there was an eclipse or something there for a minute or two. 315, now we've got an object about 10 degrees directly south, 10 degrees off the horizon. And the ones in the north are moving, one's moving away from us. Moving out fast.
This one on the right heading away too.
Yeah, we're heading north. Here he comes from the south. He's coming toward us now. Now we're observing what appears to be a beam coming down to the ground. This is unreal. 330, and the objects are still in the sky, although the one to the south looks like it's losing a little bit of altitude. We're turning on, heading back toward the base. The object to the south is still beaming down lights to the ground.
Well, okay. Actual.
Absolutely. And it's just the tip of the iceberg. The audio you just heard is part of 4 hours of events that are edited down to 18 minutes. Throughout 10 years, I brought that tape into this country from Japan in 1984 and gave it to the cable news.
Where did you get it?
I got it in Japan. They purchased it from a lawyer in Great Britain who got it from an Air Force colonel who was the friend of this gentleman making the tape because he didn't believe in UFOs. This was a secured piece of audio that this guy just gave out. And it's made its rounds, but I'm amazed in this country how little it has been heard. And it kind of escapes me why it hasn't been heard more. So you've played actually more than any show in the last 12 years.
Peter, you've done quite a bit of research on this story. How does it add up to you? In other words, with all the investigation you've put into it, I think you're into about 5, 6 years? Of course, let's set the stage. This is what you do. You're a UFO researcher.
Yeah. I had first heard about this in 1983 after Larry had gone public, and there were certain articles appearing about it, interviews, quasi-interviews, the document known as the HALT document, the report that the colonel had filled out as a consideration to the Ministry of Defense had gotten filed and later released had come up. So my interest was piqued. We had met very briefly in passing in 1983, but it wasn't something that had a tremendous impact on either of us. But 4 years later, in 1987, Larry was a featured lecturer at the 40th anniversary of the 1947 UFO sightings MUFON conference in Washington, D.C., and I was a panel member on a discussion on one of the evenings, and we heard each other speak. We introduced ourselves to each other the next day. My attitude at the time was, this is an interesting guy, a military witness, somebody who has been through a debriefing, somebody who has been through this whole UFO situation in a military situation. I wanted very much to do an extended interview with him. I had no idea that Larry had already decided that he wanted me to work on a book with him. And I went into this genuinely having no idea of what I was getting into.
Okay, Larry, are you the only person that's telling this story? With, what, 75, 80 other people? Why are they?
No, that's not accurate.
Okay.
Just because most people don't know. If in the past few years, some people have come out. Colonel Holt has made limited comments on what he can about this publicly, which is very limited. Other individuals involved in the first nights of events, we have statements from guys that were right next to me that were out there. Numerous people commented on CNN's program, except I was the only one that wasn't in silhouette. Most of them were still in government employment. What keeps these guys from talking, senior officers and all, when they're out, everyone thinks, well, they're getting out, now we're going to get the truth, which is a bunch of bunk, because these guys are also dependent on retirement. And we know for a fact that that is held over their heads like an axe if they release certain information. That retirement can be played with, withheld, whatever. It can happen.
Your response to the...
so they're out there.
Your response to the rumor that you were not at this Air Force base at this time.
Yeah.
So I think someone in the service stated this. Am I correct? Or indicated this. Okay.
I had the whistleblower scenario played upon me, like anybody, Karen Silkwood or whatever. When I came out, I gave information that led to the document that came out and the tape and all, and I had led investigators toward other witnesses. If you were involved in the events, you would have known who was there, you knew where it happened. The sad part of it is that as I went along thinking I was doing good, there were people coming out of the woodwork, usually within the UFO community, I may add, that came up with all these weird stories. I was never even in the service, all kinds of things. Anything but listening to what went on or looking at the evidence presented by not just me, but numerous other witnesses that have commented about this. And the majority say exactly what I say.
I think one of the things that we see when there is a scandal or a cover-up or whatever it is in secular life or political life is if the first person to come forward, the classic whistleblower, no matter how popular the cause or how noble the individual, folks tend to sit back and watch, waiting for them to either swing in the wind, get caught in a car crash or something, or vaporize themselves. Afterwards, people choose up sides, other people come forward. But groundbreakers are often the ones that are left to their own devices. Larry had no support. He was literally left swinging in the wind to a degree. Everybody wrote their interpretation of his story.
We need to take a break. When we come back, we'd like to take a look at Larry and the capacity of what happens to you when you blow the whistle on the government. Stay with us.
Good.
What happens to you when you blow the whistle on the government? Before we get into that, let's show some shots of the actual site.
Okay.
And give us some information.
Will I see it on the monitor there?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, that is the field where it happened. The farmhouse Larry described is off to the rear left. You'll notice in the center right what is a slightly darker discoloration. That is not an anomaly or a developing error. That is a discoloration in the soil where this thing sat.
This picture was taken 8 years after the fact when we went back to research for the first time. Probably the next picture you're going to see is one Peter took in 1990 in color, showing it in the summer, 10 years after the fact.
When you do this work, and you know you're researching an event on a physical piece of property almost a decade after the fact, the last thing that you anticipate is something like we're seeing right here. That circle of grass, when the soil was analyzed compared to surrounding soil in the field, was found to have been tremendously disrupted. The closest they could get in a laboratory situation was to put the test soil, the field soil, through an industrial microwave and then subject it to a strong sub-zero temperature. The soil itself, although green, supporting grass there, does not rejoin with water to form what we'd call conventional mud, certainly not compared to the soil in the surrounding area. It is something that really was a real surprise to me. It is not what I expected to find.
Okay.
Okay, next.
Larry, we're through. Larry, what happened to you when you blew the whistle here? When you
it's been 11 years of it. I didn't approach this subject matter to come out and be a public person. I don't think anyone really does. My mother knew about these events the next morning. I was fine because I called her on a phone which was, every phone in NATO was tapped, but I went to one I thought wasn't secured. It was. So my mother was probably the first person in the United States to know about it, short of President Carter, who was still in, who I have no doubt didn't know either. I called her with another witness. Soon I wrote her a letter very cryptically describing what happened. Colonel Holt's memo was written, then my mother responded back to me. And we have all these letters. But as time went on, I had to seek out some other people, so I got in touch with, quite by accident, two gentlemen writing a book called Clear Intent, using FOIA documents that showed that the government indeed does investigate UFO events after 1969 to this day, at least up till 1980. And I gave him this information. This particular gentleman was a police officer and kind of saying, well, it's an interesting story. We had heard rumors from England for a couple of years about this, but let's file and see if we get anything. I said, yeah, sure, good luck, you know, I'll see you later. And sure enough, the Holt document came out after 5 denials by the Air Force. Out it popped. We don't know why to this day. And that was just the beginning. All of a sudden, I was burned. I wanted to go. There's a lot of elements here where I had every right. I had a fully honorable discharge. I unfortunately have a re-enlistment code that isn't on a book.
A thought here and a theory I want to inject. Isn't it rumored, or there's this talk that possibly it could have been 70, 80 people brainwashed on this story? Isn't the story circulating?
Well, that's, you know, it's at this point now. In the beginning, they say nothing happens, and now some people in some official or ex-official capacities are saying, well, something happened, but it wasn't what you thought happened. So they're having to cop to all these different ends, and quite frankly, I don't think psychological warfare will leave trace marks in a field or leave retinal burns on my eyes, which are documented, and other personnel, and large hearts, that's another part of it. You know, so that each explanation they come up with is contradicted by physical evidence. And this event does have extraordinary evidence. You can remove me from it, and it's still as valid and as complicated as can be. People are frightened of bent waters for a number of reasons. Some of them I'm aware of, and some I'm not. But I don't go for the psychotronics and that we're manipulated. I think in some degree we could have been...
Peter, what do you think?
I think it could have been a combination of two elements. That there is no question that a real series of incursions occurred, whether you want to call them extraterrestrial, interdimensional, what have you. But we know that our government has a dark side to its history. Think back to the CIA mind control LSD experiments of the 1960s, where basically young men were put through this nightmare so that they could be studied and documented over the next years. We don't know. We don't know.
Larry, what about thought of this is a something that the Air Force goes through. It was a planned program. This has happened before is what I'm trying to say.
Oh, I believe that. It's happened before.
On this base?
Well, it's definitely happened again on that base because in 1981 there was 4 flights of security police, according to Colonel Holt, that witnessed an object come in from the North Sea, do a figure 8, and then head back to sea. I wasn't there at the time, or even in England at the time, for that matter. In 1988, I brought Peter back to Great Britain, to the base, to actually walk the walk with me. There was no way we could proceed with this book after months and months of work we had already done and have him not really have a feel for it. I'd been there in '85 and had not gotten to the site, but no one in any of the many books this is in or TV treatments around the world, no camera crew has ever been to the site where this event happened. They show you bogus things on TV most of the times on these programs. So I brought Peter back, and on the first night we're there, as he says, the 2 worst witnesses in Great Britain to have this happen, he was there to be my objective counter. Unfortunately, that all changed our first night, because on the way back to this town we were staying in, right off the Bentwaters base, we were literally watching no less than 20 solid objects flying above the trees, in the trees, around the trees. It was witnessed by other personnel on the base, things on the ground just in front of us. So, as Peter said very angrily that moment in the field, why people see this stuff go on all the time and nothing goes on? It's quite mind-blowing. There is a history there. There is a presence there. So it can't be psychotronic.
Some we're going to get back to this story, but I want to get, since we have Peter here. Now, Peter, you work with Bud Hopkins quite a bit.
Yeah.
Abduction cases. Your theory on the Roper report, do you feel like that 40 people, or 1 out of every 40 people are abducted? That's some pretty heavy
Yeah, it is.
numbers.
I'm from New York, but I'm from Missouri on this stuff. I need evidence. I am a very methodical, conservative researcher. Bud's been a dear friend for many years, but I've worked as his assistant, in there twice a week, answering mail, dealing with whatever office stuff needs being done. And I've gone through hundreds of pieces of correspondence, heartfelt correspondence from these folks. I speak to them on the phone every day. I think that the Roper poll, which is a very carefully done piece of research, if anything, strange as it sounds or awkward, if anything, I think the figures are somewhat conservative. I think at least 1 person in 40 has either been through the phenomena that we call abduction, or has been through a major sighting or a trauma related to UFOs, has partial recall, no recall, full recall, and living a secret life. I think this is much more widespread than any of us want to even begin to imagine, which means everyone in this audience knows somebody that's been through this.
You're watching In Contact. We'll be back. Stay with us. Peter, this is a very interesting story. You've done a lot of research. Can you really back this up?
I can.
How can you?
If you remove Larry Warren from this, we have gotten a paper trail that runs back through all of the base public relations officers of denials, combined with at least half a dozen other witnesses' statements, combined with, well, for example, the soil analysis laboratory report, the fact that we've documented an earlier known incident of UFO incursion over this base as early as 1956, and a continuing high incidence of UFO phenomena in the southeastern corner of England over the years. I'm sorry to say we've documented several suicides of individuals who were involved. Because of the Privacy Act of 1974, I don't know how much of that we'll be able to bring to light, with all due respect to their families.
We've got a question up here, right here.
Actually, I have a few questions. First of all, what type of validity do you have attached to the audio tape that you presented earlier? Who did the soil analysis test, and have you checked it other times than the one time you photographed it? And finally, wouldn't it also, to some extent, possibly make sense that from a combination of things that you could be dealing with a base where some strange events are occurring, but not necessarily extraterrestrial ones?
I'll start it off if you want. Your first question was, that was based on I'll deal with your last one real quick, is that, yeah, that's a possibility. I mean, I went through this thing. It's a very complicated thing. None of this is cut and dried. As far as, and that's open-ended. We're very open-ended on it. I don't know if it's from outer space, if it's from under the ocean, where I do think this phenomenon is much closer to us than we care to think. It's safe to think, well, if you're predisposed to it, they're from out there, when it's even scarier to think they might be from right here, and we just don't see them until they want us to. That's neither here nor there. But as far as the soil analysis, we have done soil analysis with one very highly respected lab in Massachusetts. We have the results from that, and certainly further work can be done on that soil. We've been financing our research ourselves. A lot of this was done gratis, so that is hopefully going to be there and available, and that site is still there for anyone to do it. And as far as photographs, we've photographed that site twice. Both of us in '88. Peter returned in '90, and then other people have just been going there now because the site is known to people now. Have we missed anything?
Yes, your first question, and it is a good question. How do we know that audio tape is authentic? Well, we do know for a fact that the lead voice is former Lieutenant Colonel Charles I. Halt, Deputy Base Commander, and we know that the tape is authentic because Mr. Halt, now retired, has confirmed that to us directly and personally. And the segment that you heard is part of about 16 minutes that got out. There are several hours that have never been heard by anybody outside of whomever Mr. Halt has chosen to play it for.
Question.
Going back to 1947 with the famous Arno sightings, it's been 46 years, and historically there's been a lot of UFO sightings around military installations. My concern is if you saw lights and these strange objects, and it was over military installation, seen by military personnel, and you were one of the witnesses, did you see anything else besides the lights? People? Did you identify anything else other than just lights?
Yeah, you might have missed it. It's such a complicated story, it's hard to stay on the timeline. We certainly did see living something. It was encased in light, there was structure to it, and faces. There was a standoff with our wing commander, Gordon Williams, where these things faced him. If they were projected or if they were real, I personally think they were real, and it was a life form that came from this machine. But there's, the court's out on that. There were certainly life forms seen there, and that's part of the elements. They're willing to say we saw lights out there, or that we saw a lighthouse, or mistook all these ridiculous explanations people in the general audience are supposed to accept. But I never saw a lighthouse that moved ever in my life, and there was something alive there, and that's what they're covering up. And they're also protecting the senior officer because he had very close interaction. If they communicated, the only way it could have been done was telepathic, if that happens. But something went on. I saw it, and so did many others. That's what they're covering up here. So there's so much more meets the eye.
You have a question?
Yes, Larry, how long was the encounter?
For me, it was about 45 minutes to an hour on site, right out at the field.
What kind of experience did you have during the encounter?
I felt like I was in a dream. My movements were at half speed. Some people apparently could run. I was in shock, I think. It just didn't seem real because it couldn't be. But so many, I had people I could grab and pinch right next to me. So.
No one speaking or something?
Well, there were some people very much in control. Some of us, it's just the way I felt, and I can only comment on that. I just felt that I was in a jello mold, and I couldn't really, it didn't seem real. I felt like it had to be a dream. It's the only way I can describe it.
Larry, you have kind of indicated you've been a marked man since you broke this story, blew the whistle. What about other people?
Other witnesses to this?
Right. What's happened to some of the other?
Well, most of us that are out now aren't doing that well. I had to go through an awful lot of post-traumatic stress in my own personal life. I lost a marriage from this. Most witnesses that become prominent in this stuff pay that price. Amongst many other things, career changes, the way you look at the world changes forever. But health problems, which are amazing. There's just so much, it overwhelms even my mind half the time. But I'm a survivor, and I've come a long way. There's sadly a lot of witnesses that haven't even begun to deal with what happened to them over there yet, and are terrified. They're terrified of this story getting out or their names being associated with it. And it's quite sad. Most of them are worse off than me.
Peter, you were talking about you could back this story up with documentation.
Mm-hmm.
What else could you offer? Or is there anything you got
I look
to
for
us
things
today?
between the lines. Sometimes what is right in front of your face you discount the quickest. If this man in any way is shaped or been delusional here, number one, I have documentation through his mother, through independent witnesses, that the very next morning he called her. So if he's a liar, the first person he lied to was his mom, and he did it the next morning. If he's a liar, then one always has to be careful what one says about anyone's mother in this world. His mother wrote back a letter within a day or two of Colonel Halt's report confirming to the effect, yes, son, you saw a UFO and it must have been amazing. That Larry was so caught up in this continuing psychodrama that I don't even think he realized that maybe the worst place he could insist that he and his new wife go on their honeymoon was back to this little corner of England instead of somewhere in the Bahamas where she wanted to go. There are lots of small things like this that I've gotten to know this guy pretty well over the last 6 years. There have been times, in fact, where I wish to God we had never met. I have been pulled very deeply into this, and at other times I think he's he's certainly one of my dearest friends and somebody I have a great deal of respect for. I think he's extremely...
We need to take a break. We'll be back. Stay with us. In contact, and sir, you have a question.
Yes, I have a question. Larry, you mentioned something about these red balls, I think of fire, so to speak. I can remember when I was a kid, me and some other kids saw one out in the country, and there was an elderly man that we talked to about that, and he was an old Frenchman, and he had a story about that. Can you shed any light on these red balls or anything like that?
Well, all I saw was it wasn't fiery at all, but it was a red sphere about the size of a basketball, and that began the event that I've been able to describe just a little bit of today. But what's more indigenous to this particular area, which we both witnessed too, for the first time even for me, were these green fireballs with tails, seemingly tails like comets flying right through the trees and maneuvering around them. Anyone can see them, very common. What are they? I don't know.
Yeah, that old man had mentioned something like that too. And I mean, that was 40-something years ago.
Yeah, so I just don't know. Thank you.
Peter, you do a lot of research on the UFO situation. What do you think it's all about? I mean, what's the purpose? You heard, we've done shows with people who say it's good. Some people say it has a religious attitude. What's your viewpoint?
That's a great question. After 17 years, I've gotten to a point where a phrase that's reminiscent is a definition of a Zen beginner. It is arriving at a point where you know you don't know. I can make some educated guesses, maybe better than some. It seems to me that, number one, there is another presence. Whether or not we want to call it interdimensional or extraterrestrial is almost a moot point. If they're here, maybe they have bases underwater, on the moon, on Mars, who knows, who cares? They're here. They've been coming and going for an awfully long time. On some level, they have a relationship with us. Maybe they're us a million years in the future. Maybe we're somebody's graduate experiment. I don't know. What I am convinced about is that fear of being perceived as impotent, if you will, has so affected world leaders who are insiders on this. Nobody wants to be the one to spring this on the status quo. We do not know the impact it will have on culture, economics, social interactions, religion. It's an absolute wild card. And so it sits there, the idiot child of the media, kind of the bastard subject of the 20th century, and nobody knows what to do with it. I do not know what their intentions are. None of them have ever given me any messages. I study, I go through every bit of research that I can.
Have you ever had an encounter yourself?
Yes, and I'll be glad to give you a little idea of that. When I was 14 years old, I was playing on the front lawn of the house I grew up in with my sister, who was 12. It's on Long Island, New York, very pretty suburb. And I caught something out of my right peripheral vision and said, "Helen, look." And we both looked up in time to see 5 silvery white, disc-shaped objects approximating the size of commercial airplanes at a distance in a very precise military V formation, with little regular yellow detailing around the edge of each one that you could only read the way you'd read windows on an airliner. 1961. I was not a kid very taken by science fiction, and we looked and we looked. In the hundreds of interviews I've done since, I know this is a standard reaction. You go through a quick checklist. They're not planes, they're not helicopters, blimps, balloons, kites, birds, clouds, and then you're stuck because they only look like one thing. They look like flying saucers from bad 1950s movies. But I knew as a kid that those didn't exist. The adult world told me that. Therefore, they couldn't be that, but there they were. And it spun me into such an anxiety and a confusion that I clamped down on it for 15 years before I re-remembered it. And when I did remember it at age 29 or 30, my life changed overnight, and I got solidly into this, and my career kind of went to hell.
Question.
I had a follow-up question since this incident happened at an Air Force base. In Sidney Shelton's book, The Doomsday Conspiracy, there was a UFO sighting, and all of the witnesses were eventually murdered. This was novel, but at the end of the book, they documented about 27 deaths associated with the Star Wars program, and an additional 17 had been documented in the Flying Saucer Review out of England. And I would like to know, in your travels and in your experience, do you feel there's a connection with either the Star Wars program, or we are dealing with a group that is outside of the government, and that's why the government can't give us an explanation?
It's a great question. Number one, I do feel that our Star Wars program certainly had something to do with trying to set up a world grid safety net, which obviously had no real potential to protect us from this technology. We found out that a little bit of prudence has paid off in the last month or so, and officially at least it's been shelved. As far as deaths associated with this phenomena, you have to be an optimist if you do this work. You can't be filled with doom and gloom. If there was a time, I feel, where people were marked who got too close in on this, certainly at our level of the game, it has passed. The reason I feel that is because, with a certain amount of irony, we are doing a fair amount of the work that maybe our government should be doing in assisting people in making a little bit of peace with the possibility that these things are quite as real as seeming extremist points of views say. So that, if anything, folks like Bud Hopkins or Dave Jacobs or some of the real preeminent scholars and researchers in this area, that maybe every day do bring a few more people to a serious consideration of this and not, oh, those UFOs, we are serving a very important purpose in enculturating this a bit more.
You're watching In Contact. Our guest, Peter Robbins, Larry Warren. Stay with us. We'll be back.
Good Star Wars question.